Okay, welcome to our leaf activity for our whittling activity. Today what we will be doing is taking an apple and whittling it into leaves. And this is a great project. It's a environmentally friendly project where you can work on your whittling skills and make a really great table decoration that you can put out during either family meal time or any kind of a meal time. A really nice decoration and fun decoration that you can then eat while your meal is going on too. It's great. This project will help you work on your whittling skills, and it's also environmentally friendly, so you can either eat what you make or you can also take it outside and feed your local animals with this project. So to get started, let me go through some of the supplies that I have. The table that I'm using here is actually a sheet that I can use to clean off my knife with. Of course, you always want to make sure that you're using a clean knife, so we'll do a quick knife inspection before we get started. And over here I also have my first aid kit, so anytime that you're doing a whittling project, make sure that you have your first aid kit with you. Right here is a knife sharpener that I'll be using, and I'm using a regular, just a buck knife in order to do this project. The buck knife is not necessarily the right tool for this job, but because I want to work on my whittling skills and I want to work on my knife skills, I'm using the knife that I carry with me in my adventure bag. Usually if you're going to be carving into fruit, usually you would be using more of a straight edge knife. There are other types of knives that work a little bit better for this, but I'm going to go ahead and work on my whittling skills with my buck knife. So we're choosing an apple. An apple's a really great way to get started if you don't have a lot of whittling experience. Apple is great. The skin is a little bit tough, just like carving through bark on a stick, and you have to work a little bit to get through the apple, but it's not quite as difficult as carving a piece of wood. So it's kind of a nice way to get started. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, we'll be creating leaves. First thing I'm going to do, knife inspection. I like using my buck knife is a locking blade, so that's the kind of knife I like to use when I'm whittling. And do a quick knife inspection. Looks like it's clean. I don't see any rust on there. It looks good. Before starting this video, I did sharpen the knife, but for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna just go ahead and run it through my sharpener a couple times, just to demonstrate making sure that your knife is sharp before you get started with your project. That should be good for now. I did sharpen my knife before we started, and I'm just going to go ahead and wipe off the blade after sharpening it. Okay, good. So now I'm ready to get started. So the first thing that we're going to do with this apple is we're going to cut it in half. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is actually one of the most difficult parts of the project, is cutting the apple in half. Because we're using a buck knife, the knife itself is a little bit bigger, so you have to put a little bit of pressure in there. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and cut these halves into quarters. So, exact same thing again. There we go. And with the thicker buck knife, it just kind of splits right in half. It's more of a wedge than a cut. So now we have a quarter of an apple, and this is what we're going to use in order to make these leaves. So it's important to keep in mind, if you are doing this in a scouting program, it's important to keep in mind that knife always has to move away from yourself. So the skills that I'll be demonstrating on this video are the BSA skills where we're moving the knife away from ourselves. If you're not doing this with the BSA program, there are techniques where you can move the knife towards yourself. Usually you're using a thumb guard or usually you're using some kind of protective gloves so that you don't cut yourself while you're doing that. But for the purposes of a BSA scout learning their whittling skills, we're going to go ahead and try to always move the knife away from ourselves while we're doing this. So the first step, once we have our quarter apple, is we want to flatten this part out so that the leaf will sit flat on the table. So I'm going to go ahead and, just like what you would do with a normal piece of wood, whittling is all about doing small shaves at a time. You don't want to gouge into the apple. You don't want to gouge into the piece of wood. It's all about little bits at a time. So we're going to go ahead and, moving away from ourselves, going to go ahead and start to flatten out the bottom part of this quarter apple. Notice these are all small shaves that I'm taking off, just like I would if this was a piece of wood. The idea is to try to utilize and get comfortable with your wood skills, even though you're doing this on an apple. Of course, you can take huge gouges out of an apple, but that would really defeat the purpose of learning the skills that we're trying to learn here. Okay, good. And so this, you can see, pretty flat on the bottom, so that's looking pretty good. Pretty happy with that. So now, just in general, we need to make somewhat of a leaf shape out of this quarter piece of apple. It looks pretty good already. This is a small apple, so depending on the size of the apple you get, there's different ways that you can do this. This is a small apple, and what I need to do is kind of curve this up a little bit to make a leaf shape. So I'm going to do what's called scoring, and the reason why I'm going to do that is scoring will give me a nice solid line that I can then follow for carving. So I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to just give it a little bit of a score, and this is going to define the shape of the leaf. Cut in a little bit more than I wanted to, but I think we'll be okay. It's just going to make this a little bit smaller than anticipated. So I just scored the apple. I just drew a line right where I want to cut. The reason why I'm doing that is that's going to separate the apple skin. And that's a pretty common thing. Scoring is a pretty common thing that you'll do also when you're carving a piece of wood. So now I have a line that I can shave down to in order to create my leaf shape. Again, little bits at a time is what we want to do. Always going away from myself. Never want to move the knife towards myself, so that means you just have to move your apple around. In the future, we'll replace the apple with a block of wood. Just doing small little shaves at a time here. And there's my leaf shape, and you can see I have nice straight lines that are here, and that's because I scored the apple before I started. And so that scoring gives it a really nice, just a straight line. So that's a really great way to get started with creating your apple shape. I'm sorry, your leaf shape. And so now I need to create the little sides on the leaves here. So I can do the same thing. I can score it, or I can just start notching into it. The important thing is trying to be somewhat symmetrical with these leaf sides. So at the most basic level, you want to at least have the same amount. So I have 1, 2, 3 notches that I created on this one. If you can get the more symmetrical you can get these, the better they're going to look. So I'm going to, at the very minimum, have 3 on this one also, because it looks like it's about the same size there. For this, I'm not going to score it. I'm actually just going to go ahead and start cutting right into it. This is the one part of the project that's different than what you'll be able to do if you're using an actual block of wood. You wouldn't be able to cut into it this way. You'd have to use more of a sawing tool. But with an apple, we can still use our knife to cut into it. And so let's go ahead and we'll make 3 notches on here. There's 1 notch. 2 notches. 3 notches. There we go. And I'm going to try to get the same 3 notches on the other side, we'll try to get them roughly around the same area. Doesn't have to be perfect. The more you do this and the better you get at it, the more symmetrical they'll end up being. So we're just going to go ahead and make 3 notches this side. One notch. Two notches. Three notches. Okay, good. So we'll just, in general, take a look, see if there's anything that we want to touch up on. I think this one over here, I could probably touch up on that a little bit more. So I'm going to make this one a little bit more wide. Just little shaves at a time to do that. And that looks just fine to me. So if you want, I'm going to go ahead and wipe off my blade. If you want, you can just leave your leaf the way this is. Looks just fine as a leaf like that. If those are the skills that you have, then just leave it there. You never want to overdo a project, especially with a knife, something that could be dangerous. But if you're ready for a little bit more, I do like creating these little lines in here. It just gives it a little bit of extra style to it. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and score onto the top of this apple again. So just take my knife and I'm going to create the shape that I will later be cutting out. Again, this is very similar to what you can do with a stick. If you're going to score and you're going to take the bark off of the stick, you can do the exact same thing. So now that you can see I have my scored lines on here, I'm just going to take my knife underneath that apple skin, and right where those score lines are, slide my knife right underneath there, and it will come right out. And we have our first apple decoration, and you can see the scoring lines. That apple skin will peel off right where your score lines are, just the same way bark will when you're whittling on a piece of wood. So these are all of our whittling skills that you can do if you're using a piece of wood that we're practicing with an apple. The only thing that's different between the apple and the piece of wood is you would need to use a small saw in order to cut these little notches out. But everything else that we've done here are your standard whittling skills. So I'm done with my project here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wipe off my blade, make sure that my blade is clean. I like to sharpen my knife after I'm done using it also, so go ahead and just run this through a couple times to demonstrate sharpening it when I'm done. And this is a locking blade, so I'm going to go ahead and safely close my locking blade. And now I have one project completed.